Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back with the SAPI IP Business Talks. Today, we are back also in Europe. Oh, Ivan, I did not ask you, where are you right now? But I guess you're in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are back in Europe. So our time soon, it's 5 o'clock. I'm very happy to have Ivan Gauci here. He will explain.
Back also in Europe?
He will explain us.
Oh, Ivan, I did not ask you, where are you?
Sorry,
but I guess you're in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are back in Europe. So our time soon, it's 5 o'clock. I'm very happy to have Ivan Gauci here. He will explain.
Back also in Europe?
He will explain us.
Oh, Ivan, I did not ask you, where are you?
Sorry, I guess you're in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are back in Europe. So our time soon, it's 5 o'clock. I'm very happy to have Ivan Gauci here. He will explain.
Back also in Europe?
He will explain us.
Oh, Ivan, I did not ask you, where are you?
Sorry, I guess you're in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are back in Europe. So our time soon, it's 5 o'clock.
So I don't know how to stop that.
To have Ivan Gauci here. He will explain.
Also in Europe?
He will explain us.
Ivan, I did not ask.
Okay. Good. A little technical problem. So again, we are live. That means we are happy that you joined us in the audience. We have also some accredited guests here, and I would like to introduce to you Tobias Lipp. He is an independent consultant, also an MEPLM alumni, and works in the field of IP management. We have Dr. Erica Smith. I'm very happy that she is with us. She is Executive Director, Intellectual Management Services in the Caribbean. And we have Russell Tom. And Russell is from a Scottish IP law firm, Multigard, and I hope I pronounce it close to how it should be pronounced. Okay, so thank you very much for being here, and I'm very happy when you give us your comments, your questions here live into our chat with Ivan Gauci. So now, Ivan, you are an MEPLM alumni. I'm very happy that you are here, that you present us your master thesis, your background. But first of all, introduce please yourself. Tell us, how did you came into that, to a certain extent, strange field, IP management, and what you're doing there, so what is your background and what you're doing right now?
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for this kind invitation, and also welcome to our audience. My name is Ivan Gauci. I'm from Malta. At the moment, I'm working with the EU IPO in Spain. So yes, a little background about me. I would describe myself as a generalist. Let's say I've worked a little bit in different areas, be it services, private companies, finance with the banks, marketing, and also lately with IP. Let's say I would describe a little bit my specializations as strategy and marketing. And also I've worked with EU funding programs in Malta. And recently, in the last 5 years, I've started working in the area of IP. I've joined the Maltese IP office as an assistant director for the last 5 years, where I was involved in different areas of IP administration, let's say, because an IP office is much more involved in IP administration. So let's say getting and pushing SMEs to get their rights registered and increasing awareness of IP.
Yeah.
I'm quite an enthusiast person in terms of SMEs. Let's say I would say my focus as to services and products is more to provide SMEs more awareness and education on IP. So yes, after that 5 year stint experience in the Maltese office, now I've moved for the past 3 years with the UIPO, where I've been working in the customer department, specifically on creating products and services for SMEs, such as the SME fund, where in fact I will be mentioning it a bit more later, the possibilities as to services for SMEs such as IP pro bono, offered by various IP reps across Europe, the IP Pre-Diagnostic or IP scan, which is also offered to SMEs by different IP offices. And also, one of my tasks here at the UIPO at the moment is working as to developing more as to awareness and education for SMEs.
Okay. So, I mean, that comes. Now we can come directly to our first question about your master thesis. So you in 2021. And this is also published on the blog of the IP Business Academy. You made a master thesis about this pre-diagnostic service, IP pre-diagnostic service for IP management as a tool, which is offered by national IP offices. Can you explain a little bit why is that interesting? What is the background? What is the background of your thesis? What did you analyze there, and what was your finding?
Okay. I need a long period of time to answer that question. No, I'll try to be short. Okay, no. Let's say, as we know, the intellectual property system can be seen as one of the most has a very critical role in the innovation process. For example, IP rights, such as patents, trademarks, designs, are all enabling innovators to get exclusive rights for their knowledge creations and also to facilitate knowledge and technology transfer, for example. However, although the relevance of intellectual property within such innovations is obvious, actually SMEs are not making full use of the IP system to their benefit. For example, if we had to look at Europe, we have around 25 million SMEs, which is the backbone, let's say, of the European economy. They employ 100 million of people and account almost to half of Europe's GDP. However, let's say, although as we are seeing these numbers, 50% of such SMEs report innovation activities, studies from the UIPO highlight that only 9% of European SMEs have actually a registered intellectual property right. So let's say, taking on this background, taking on this little bit of a background about SMEs and IP, the objective of this research was to identify, let's say, the use of this service, the IP Pre-Diagnostic service, by national IP offices. In fact, this is a new service being offered by national IP offices lately since the launch of the SME fund, although some offices used to offer it before, apart on their own. And the aim, let's say, of the IP Pre-Diagnostic service is to promote IP rights usage and also to introduce IP management within the business models of such SMEs via the help of an IP expert. As we shall see more in this session, an IP Pre-Diagnostic is a service which gives advice and looks at all the products and services of the SME and also the current business model, and also then suggests a matching IP strategy for their particular business. Due to its nature of introducing IP rights and recommending IP strategies, in fact, this IP Pre-Diagnostic service could be looked at as a bridge to introduce IP management in this big gap that exists as to SMEs level and knowledge of IP and the IP system in Europe.
Yeah.
So this study was examining 4 IP offices, how they use IPPD, the IP Pre-Diagnostic service with SMEs, and I examined via desk research for European national IP offices, mainly the UK IP office, the Spanish IP office, the Danish IP office, and the French IP office. Little bit as to why IP is important to SMEs. I think, let's say, as mentioned before, the importance of the numbers and the economic contribution of SMEs. One has to see why IP is important. I would say we have to say first why SMEs are so important in the economy. So once we have established,
maybe one question, because whenever I'm discussing SME issues, I realize that that different people talk about different companies when it comes to SMEs. So what was your definition of SME for the study?
Yes, perfect. No, that's a very good question, especially in the remit of European area and European agencies, let's say. No, for an SME, we always look, so it's a small, medium enterprise as SME, but of course it also includes micro. For example, a micro SME is an SME which has less than 10 people employed. And I think it depends on the financial income per year. So like a micro would be someone who produces a revenue of less than 2 million per annual. Let's say a medium enterprise would be someone who is approximately employing around 250 persons. So that's the maximum for an SME. Someone who employs more than 250, that's a bigger, let's say, organization or company.
Yeah, got you. Thank you. You were explaining us why SMEs are important for the economy.
Yes, exactly. In fact, another point which I mentioned also in this research also is, okay, why little bit then SMEs? What is the reason? What are the reasons why SMEs are not participating into this IP arena? You know, why are they not getting? Why there are only 9% who have registered IP rights? And in fact, let's say we have to mention that having an SME, the innovation, it's not something which is easy. We all know that, let's say, the average business lifetime of an SME is around 5 years. Of course, this is all due to the the business risks that are there for entrepreneurs. In fact, a recent study from the European Commission issued last year mentioned a little bit the main factors which are hampering or stopping the innovation for European SMEs. And they mentioned first and foremost financial difficulties as to capital. The shortage of and difficulties in finding right people for qualified skilled staff. Also, the less experience and limited internal know-how on how to manage the innovation process.
Yeah.
Bureaucratic hurdles, and also a little bit the small network that they share compared to bigger organizations, which have much more ease to make collaboration, let's say. Considering all these, let's say, business things that are affecting SMEs, then of course, if we have to go at the IP level, we all know from UIPO studies also that SMEs don't invest in IP mainly due to two main things. One is because they don't know the lack of knowledge. They have a lack of knowledge about the benefits and the usage of IP. And also the cost of protecting and enforcing IP rights. I think those are some of the factors which are affecting the usage of IP in Europe by SMEs.
Okay, and what was you analyzed that, and what was now your finding from the thesis?
Yes, let's say. Maybe before going into the findings, I would like just to mention a little bit the role of the IP office. Let's say, it's because traditionally IP offices, national IP offices, were more, let's say, concerned as to the protection of IP right, and that's it.
Yeah.
And this was let's say the passive role which they had before. Now, many IP offices are re-examining or changing this role, and are expanding more into other operations of IP, such as IP registration and protection, IP outreach services and promotion of IP education also, promotion of how SMEs can also exploit IP via IP management. That's also something new which IP offices are starting. For example, this service of IP Pre-Diagnostic. There are some offices who are touching also into IP valuation, IP pro bono, this kind of areas which go into the management area. Of course, IP offices touch also on the area of enforcement, which is also part of the IP management, let's say, box. Together with, let's say, nowadays they are trying to reach as much SMEs via collaboration with other stakeholders of the SME ecosystems to achieve more awareness. For example, working with associations, crowdfunding associations, Chamber of Commerces, so that they reach more SMEs, because basically one of the main factors why SMEs don't use IP is because the lack of awareness, which we don't have.
Yeah.
So having this little bit background of IP from the national IP offices, now they are starting a little bit to go into the area of and the importance of IP management and the potential use of IP, and also the importance of IP strategy for SMEs. And this brings us to the topic which was investigated, to the topic of IP Pre-Diagnostic. In fact, as I mentioned before, this topic of IP Pre-Diagnostic could be a little bit a means to bridge this gap between the lack of knowledge of IP and also IP rights and IP management. IP Pre-Diagnostic started in 2004. There was the French IP office who started it as a methodology with SMEs, and then it was developed a little bit more by the European Patent Office, and then other national offices took it and accustomed it to their needs, let's say. If I had to define an IP Pre-Diagnostic, I would say that it's analysis and evaluation of IP as it relates to the particular SME. So it analyzes the appropriate and particular context of that particular SME, and it takes account also of other parameters. It has been designed for any SME. It could be used by a university, research center, who wishes to assess their potential in the area of IP, and also then to use IP to further development.
For any IP means, for any SME means, it's independent of the branch or the business model or that kind of business influencing factors.
Exactly. So in terms of, let's say, since it can be tailored easily to all types of sectors, of course, it can open its let's say amplitude as to the type of IP rights depending on the type of sector, which, for example, could be more using some kinds of IP right. For example, the pharma could be more into patents and trade secrets compared to a small SME who could just be interested in a trademark, let's say, and some kind of trade secret. It's quite, let's say, as we're discussing, a flexible approach that is tailored for each SME, and it also relies on the expertise of the person providing the pre-diagnostic. And it's not, as we're talking, a one-size-fits-all tool. It depends on the particular SME, and the recommendations and the reports and the findings will, of course, depend on the particular SME which is being examined.
Okay.
As mentioned, it covers all IP rights, patents, trademarks, industrial designs, copyright, as well as other the informal IP rights, and also like of trade secrets, contracts, licenses, prior art searches, and also buying and selling of technology.
Yeah, very broad understanding of IP. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As a process, it's quite a, let's say, thorough process. It usually involves, as an IP pre-diagnostic service, four steps. There's the preparation step, where the IP expert will be examining from his side and studying, let's say, the SME before also going and doing the interview. In fact, then the second step would be having an interview. Normally it's carried out with the CAO, the marketing person, the strategy, or the finance people of that particular SME. It could be just a one-man show also sometimes, because an SME could be a very small one. Once, let's say, there's the interview, where little bit the analysis will go into first the IP.
Let's stay a second with the interview. Russell has a very interesting question. So when we take the reality of an SME, they don't have a dedicated IP person typically. They definitely don't have an IP department, and quite often they even don't have a dedicated IP person. So with whom you make this interview? Is it the CEO, the managing director? Or is it an R&D guy, or I don't know, a marketing person?
Yes, that's true. Let's say, no, as little bit, I was little bit going into, sometimes, especially small SMEs, they will not have an expert in IP, definitely. And so more and more, let's say, this kind of interview would be with mostly the managerial people, which could be one person, maybe, so the CEO, this chief financial officer. Let's say the best is to have the main key people, let's say, there. But as also came a little bit from the research, let's say SMEs normally, as we know, and we've said, they don't even sometimes know that they have an IP right, or they have the potential to register an IP right, or that they don't have an IP strategy yet, or they are not thinking about it in their business model. So it's all also depends from the IP expert, how really little bit he's going into the depth as to analyzing the company, and also a little bit coming up front as to understanding the business model, because I think for me that's a little bit the heart from where one should start: the business model, the market environment affecting the SME, and then from then coming up with and understanding what they want for the future and developing an IP strategy from there.
Okay.
Yes. So what will be, let's say, analyzed by the IP expert, let's say, and then developed into a report with recommendations would be the SME's business model and company strategy. This is the first area that will be developed in the report. Also, let's say an audit or let's say a quick sheet of the existing IP rights that the company has, which maybe they don't even have ever considered, potential uses of IP searches. So FTAs, trademarks searches, in order to know what potential use of registering trademarks or patents could be available, or if there is something already available in the market for them. And then finally, the idea is to develop, let's say, the expert will develop an IP management strategy for them as to the future. So it's more about, then they will have a little bit more information or analysis how they can grow with IP. It's not just about protection, but also exploitation part. Let's say that's the balance of the IP pre-diagnostic.
So quite a holistic approach. Yeah. Hmm?
Yes, exactly. Normally, it's let's say this IP prediagnostic is covered over a period of 4 months. Once an SME gets allocated in terms of the SME fund an IP expert, and I think that would be the overall, let's say, structure and deliverables over the IPD service.
Yeah, but what you did in your thesis is that you distinguished and compared the approaches of the different offices, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and now we come back to my question. What was the finding of this analysis? I mean, that's very interesting that these different offices have different approaches to the question, what is IP management, or what is necessary and relevant for SMEs?
Exactly. No, interestingly, so I compared from this research as to the usage of IP pre-diagnostic services from 4 national IP offices, which were the UK IP office, the Danish IP office, the Spanish IP office, and the French IP office, sorry. Yes, from the findings, it came up that all of them, let's say, they have the experience of providing a good service of IP pre-diagnostic, due also to such long years that they have been providing it. So they are quite as to providers, mature and refined providers in terms of IP pre-diagnostic. Having said this, let's say all IP offices analyzed all IP rights, all available IP rights. It was found, which we mentioned, different types of IP rights, but somehow there is little bit some kind of bias as to more on the area of patents, as to what is being recommended in these reports. It could be, as you mentioned, Alex, because maybe of the industry or sector which is being analyzed for the service, which would more indicate the usage or recommend the usage of a patent. Having said this, there was an interesting factor from the UK IP office, which a little bit their scheme offered explicitly calls, let's say, where an SME would initially be a little bit identified as to which area of IP right they mostly would be investigating. So once the IP office knows that information, they get allocated a specific expert, which is expert, for example, in copyright or trade secrets.
But that leads me, excuse me, there's one question on the is who are these IP experts who are doing that pre-diagnostic?
Yeah, good question. Yes, under the SME fund, let's say, so for the SME fund, there are 2 types of IP experts. There could be experts coming from the national IP offices who would be doing the IP pre-diagnostic service, or else a private IP expert, could be an IP lawyer, could be an IP manager. They could also offer such services to the national IP offices. So it could be from either from the national IP office or let's say an external provider coming from the private sector, which would be an expert in IP law or an IP manager.
Yeah, got you. Okay, so one of the key findings was that there is a certain bias to the question which IP is recommended and analyzed. Anything else?
Yes, let's say only from the 4, let's say only 2 from the 4 IP offices, only 2 little bit were giving that particular importance to the area of business model and the market aspects of the company, let's say. And also a little bit I have little bit also encountered little bit from the research that maybe this could be an area where when we go into the area of an IP legal person, this type of knowledge might be a little bit missing as to how to identify the business model and the market aspects of the company. So this could be a factor where for example, when someone with a more legal specialization might be a little bit not quite accustomed into analyzing then the market.
Exactly. I mean, that's I would say my doubt about the question who is doing that and what exactly is analyzing is exactly that point. I mean, one thing is the general applicability of certain IP rights. I mean, that is a more or less legal question. But the more interesting question for SMEs is when we analyze the business model, then the question is which IP and in which way is profitable, is beneficial for the company. And that's really a question of the business model, of the strategy. And to a certain extent, I'm a little bit in doubt that this could be really a job of a let's say classical IP lawyer. I mean, typically they are trained to recognize, okay, there is a certain inventive or not trivial object, like a brand or a design or an invention, and I can apply IP rights to it. But whether that makes sense or not is a completely different question, and this is a management question. And this has a lot to do with the business model of the company. And this is not simply said that just because there is something which can be protected, that it makes sense to do so. Yeah. And then the next question is in which way it should be protected. So I think that's really an interesting question. So who is that, and what is the intention at the end, and what is the understanding of the role of IP within the context of IP management within these SMEs?
Exactly. No, if we always go with the presumption that IP strategy and IP management has always a little bit the basis on the actual business model of the company, then definitely that's a key point to investigate, to then analyze and develop further in terms of what IP rights are going to be protected and exploited for the future.
Yeah. Because now on the chat, Andreas Hansen says, and I think that's, I mean, it's a little bit harsh, but at the end, it's a good point. So is it just a service that an IP lawyer is paid to go into the company to find any non-trivial objects to make business with it in terms of to protect it? I mean, nothing against it. It is good that we find these objects which should be or which can be protected, and then we have a different discussion. Should we do so? I mean, nothing wrong about that. But obviously, what your thesis came up with is a question.
Yes. Yes. Let's say from what also was a little bit examined and found out that most national IP offices, even for example, the UIPO with the service which they are offering under the SME fund, which is branded the IP scan, what there is let's say there's a quality check as to the report, what it should include. So there are, let's say, the 5 main sections: IP management, recommendations, the audit of the type of IP rights identified, and the business model. And this type of, let's say, quality check is done by the IP office to check that the experts are really keeping with this kind of, let's say, quality. So yes, in terms of.
But a question which arises, and I think that's really interesting, is who is selecting these experts who do that pre-diagnostic, and with which criteria they are selected?
Okay. Yes. For an IP expert, let's say, to participate in the SME fund, in this case, let's say, what do? They have to foresee a training given by the UIPO, and on IPPD, on the IP Pre-Diagnostic, to go through what is the process, what application forms, what is the reporting structure, what templates, what is being expected from them. So in terms of process, there's training given. Of course, the selection is based, so the experts are chosen from the IP offices involved in this initiative. So let's say a private IP expert who wants to participate as an IP expert, he has to get in touch with the national IP office in his country, depending if that country is offering the IP scan. And also another requirement is that they have to have a certain amount of years of experience working in IP.
Okay.
Also, there are also.
So let's say the typical requirements.
Exactly.
What the system can do. I mean, that's normal. I would like to come to another question. So now we have a better understanding what the pre-diagnostic is doing and why it is so relevant and so important. And I think so. Basically, it's a great initiative. Yeah. So it's really supportive. And as Dr. Smith said, that would be so for the Caribbean, for example, where we have all these micro SMEs with nearly no knowledge about IP at all. That would be a real benefit, and I think it's a great initiative for Europe and the European companies. But let's say, okay, we have that now, what would you say? So we have right now, and we have these standards on quality, on IP management, and would you say that these service in the pre-diagnostic could be improved also in that direction, that we not just have a status quo, that we also have a certain recommendation according to the standards to improve?
Definitely. Let's say the SME fund started only, let's say, we are in the second year, so there's always room for improvement. Definitely also, specifically for the IP pre-diagnostic, an idea would be to try to, as much as possible, to find a harmonization across the different IP offices as to the methodology of offering an IP scan, since, let's say, as we've seen, as we've discussed, it's managed, the IP pre-diagnostic, by the country IP offices, and they select their own expert. So the idea, the more we're, let's say, going into offering the service in terms of EUIPO, we're going more into the harmonization as to the process, and also to ascertain the quality of the kind of reporting and recommendation that are being given by the IP experts. So yes, we're improving in that area, and that's something which came up as a recommendation for this research.
Now, one LinkedIn user is saying, and that's also an interesting aspect, I would say. Obviously, there is a reason why SMEs do not care about IP. And but we can simply take it as a fact they don't care to a certain extent. And so how can we make sure that they apply for such a funding scheme, for such a initiative? Because at the end, when they don't come and say we would like to have it, you cannot work. So first, how can we make sure that the companies apply? And second, how do we select the companies? So let us assume we have more companies compared to what we can fund. So which criteria are used to select the right companies which are, let's say, worth to be part of that funding scheme?
Okay, let's say for example, the UK IPO offers some specific criteria as to who can participate for their own IP audit scheme. Actually, their system works that they have a little bit of a business advisors who first they pre-select this kind of SME, as mentioned, which might be more into getting this kind of service. So first, there is the selection of the business advisor who chooses, due to some criteria, that SME, and then that SME can apply for the UK scheme. In case of the SME fund, it's open to all SMEs as long as they qualify as an SME, as we've spoken. So any SME can apply to the IP scan. There's a lot of information on the EUIPO website. Let's say an SME can get as much as 2,250 euro as a grant, as a voucher. And actually, they can use these on different types of IP services, which are being co-funded by the UIPO. For example, in case of the IP scan, an SME could get 90% of the costs off. So a discount of 90% on an IP scan. There's also the opportunity to apply for a European trademark or registered community design and get up to 75% discount. And also the same discount for 75% can be applied for an SME to apply for a national trademark or national design. And also there is also the availability to apply for a national patent, which are administered by the National IP Office, and get up to 50% discount for the application fee. The process is quite simple. They just visit the UIPO website, get the information over there, and apply on the UIPO website. They get this, let's say, IP right voucher, a grant, and then they can go and use that voucher with the IP office, or apply after, once they get the voucher, at the UIPO for a UTM or registered design.
Okay, and then the national IP office will choose the expert which will be appointed for working with that company, right?
Exactly. So all IP pre-diagnostic experts are trained by the UIPO to deliver the service, and then there's, let's say, a pool of IP experts for each country. And once an SME applies for the IP pre-diagnostic, they will be assigned an IP expert. Should an SME maybe have any let's say preference, they can also ask for any particular expert to be allocated to them.
My one comment from Andreas Hansen is very interesting, that he said right now, maybe to get more SMEs interested in the funding scheme could lie in the information for other stakeholders, let's say banks or investors or public grants, that these institutions and stakeholders of the innovation system could get better information about the IP status of such an SME. Because this is completely intransparent to them, whether they handle the IP in a professional way or not. I mean, just because you are an SME, that doesn't mean that you are unprofessional in handling your IP. It is simply an assumption, and it is the rule. But we could have an exception here, which means maybe other stakeholders in the national innovation systems should also be informed about that wonderful instrument, basically.
That's a very good question in terms of, let's say, dissemination and promotion of the SME fund, including the IP pre-diagnostic or the IP scan. In fact, the UIPO is investing a lot since 2 years into working and building a network of stakeholders, which are, let's say, the stronghold of the SME ecosystems. For example, we're trying to work, and we're working with the business angels associations.
Oops. Well, my guest is gone. Okay. Yeah. So we are very close to the end. I mean, it's a pity that Ivan is gone. I don't know what happens. For the moment, I would say thank you very much for especially to our accredited guests, Tobias Lipp, Dr. Smith, and Russell Tom. Thank you very much for staying with us. I wish you a wonderful evening this Wednesday, and I'm looking forward to see you next time to the SAPI IP Business Talk, and we will answer your questions together with Ivan on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.